Hi, I'm Abby from Rtings.com. It's once again time for a battle. Similar panel, two titans, but there can be only one victor. Who will win between the LG C4 and the Sony BRAVIA 8? We'll be covering the main differences between these two TVs, namely their design, HDR brightness, image accuracy, inputs, and gaming features, so stay tuned. When it comes to design, these two TVs look very similar from the front. Both TVs have thin bezels, with the only noticeable difference here being their respective stands. On the LG C4, you get a sturdy center-mounted stand. It's made of both metal and plastic. Metal on the front, plastic on the back. And it holds the TV decently well, though it does wobble a little when pushed. The stand lifts the TV about 2.7 inches, so most soundbars will fit in front without blocking the screen, though it can be kind of a tight fit. As for the Sony BRAVIA 8, it comes with metal feet instead of a stand. And these feet are fantastic. They're sturdy and they hold the TV very well. The TV barely wobbles when pushed. Plus, unlike the LG C4 stand, the feet can be placed in 4 distinct positions: a narrow or wide position horizontally, and a low or high position vertically. At the highest vertical setting, the feet lift the TV about 3.9 inches from the table, which is high enough for any soundbar to easily fit below the screen. Or, if you prefer to go for a sleeker look, you can place the feet in their low position, which gives you about 1.7 inches of clearance. The feet make the Sony BRAVIA 8 more versatile when placing it on a variety of surfaces, or if you want to pair it with a soundbar. When viewed from the back, the two TVs look quite different. The LG C4's back is made of plastic, but with a unique stone-like finish that's grainy to the touch. There isn't anything else like it really, but it feels nice. The Sony BRAVIA 8 has a more typical checkerboard pattern, which you can find on many other recent Sony TVs. When it comes to inputs, the LG C4 has 4 full HDMI 2.1 bandwidth ports, and they're all capable of up to 4K at 144 Hz. This is new for LG this year, as all their TVs were previously limited to 4K at 120 Hz, so nice upgrade. The TV's second HDMI port doubles as the eARC port, and it passes through a ton of advanced audio formats, including DTS, so the C4 is definitely a good choice if you like to collect physical media. The TV's inputs face towards the left when looking at it from the front, making them easy to access if the TV is on its stand, but they're hard to reach if you wall mount it. The back has clips through which you can funnel cables, and there's also a clip on the stand to hide the cables behind it. Otherwise, the TV has 3 USB ports, 1 digital optical audio out port, an Ethernet port, and an antenna connection. Honestly, this TV is excellent for ports, so kudos LG. On the Sony BRAVIA 8, the ports are in a recessed cutout on the far left if viewed from the front, making them a little hard to reach if the TV is flush against the wall. There are 4 HDMI ports, though only ports 3 and 4 support HDMI 2.1 bandwidth for 4K at 120 Hz signals. To make matters worse, port 3 is also the eARC port, which means you'll lose one of your 2.1 inputs if you connect the TV to a soundbar or receiver. You'll have to find a way to bypass the TV's limited number of ports, likely through an HDMI 2.1 hub, which isn't something you have to worry about on the C4. Sony is the only one of the big 3 manufacturers to be limited to only 2 HDMI 2.1 ports, so we're really hoping they remedy that next year. At least it can pass through all major audio formats from Dolby and DTS. Plus, like the C4, it supports the popular Dolby Vision HDR format. The other inputs include 2 USB ports, one of which is a USB 3.0 port, 1 digital optical audio out port, 1 infrared in port, and an ATSC 3.0 tuner for 4K over-the-air channels. It also has Sony's S-Center input, so you can connect certain Sony-branded soundbars and receivers to the TV and use the TV's built-in speakers as a center channel. There's no doubt that the LG C4 has the edge over the BRAVIA 8 when it comes to inputs, but let's talk about what really matters: performance. Since both TVs are OLEDs, there are identical aspects like contrast and blooming performance. Instead of focusing on what is the same, let's talk about the categories where the TVs perform differently. So, can the Sony BRAVIA 8 compensate for its lack of inputs through sheer peak performance? Well, maybe not, as the LG C4 is noticeably brighter than the Sony BRAVIA 8 in HDR. In test slides, the two TVs are very similar, but in real scene tests, which are meant to simulate real content, the LG has a clear edge over the Sony. So if you're looking for a TV to make those highlights pop when watching HDR content, the C4 is the TV for you. However, the LG C4 does come with a caveat. It noticeably dims when in game mode in HDR. The BRAVIA 8 doesn't have this. In fact, the Sony is slightly brighter in game mode than it is in its professional picture mode, though this does come at the cost of accuracy. What does this all mean in practice? It means that the two TVs look pretty similar in game mode, though the BRAVIA 8 has a slight edge nit-wise. It's a bummer that the LG loses so much of its brightness in this setting, especially when other 2024 LG releases have seemingly solved that problem, like the G4 and the B4. Now, what about accuracy when watching HDR content? Well, both TVs are incredibly accurate, but the LG C4 has a slight edge here. Some darker shadows and midtones are a bit brighter than intended on the C4, but on the BRAVIA 8, a large portion of shadows and midtones are displayed a bit dimmer than they should be, and some midtones are brighter than intended. We're nitpicking a little here, as the BRAVIA 8 is truly excellent in this regard. But hey, if we didn't nitpick, we wouldn't have anything to talk about. These two TVs are some of the best models on the market after all. We won't linger too long on SDR brightness, as the two TVs are nearly identical here. Where they're not nearly identical is in how accurate they are in SDR out of the box. No nitpicking needed here. The Sony BRAVIA 8 is far less accurate in SDR than the LG C4. The Sony's white balance is disappointing out of the box, with blues very overrepresented in mid-grays and brighter grays, and its color temperature is noticeably cooler than our target of 6500 Kelvin. The color accuracy on the Sony is great, but there's definitely some inaccuracies with most colors. In comparison, the LG C4 has only minor problems with minor inaccuracies in whites, lighter yellows, and lighter cyans. Its color temperature is a bit warmer than our target of 6500 Kelvin, and very bright scenes are slightly too bright. But no question about it, the LG C4 has the clear edge here. You can calibrate both TVs to near perfection, and purists will want to get their Sony BRAVIA 8 calibrated just to get the most out of it. Sony has been the king of image processing for a long time, but guess what? LG has really caught up to them in the last year or two. The LG C4 and the Sony BRAVIA 8's image processing is nearly identical, although the Sony does have the slight edge when it comes to upscaling performance. The C4 smooths out low-quality content a tad better, but barely, and it comes at the cost of more details lost when compared to the Sony. But seriously, the differences in image processing between these two TVs are extremely small, so kudos to you, LG. Let's end this comparison by talking about input lag. We've just mentioned that the LG has really improved its image processing lately, but on the opposite end, Sony seems to have done some good work on their input lag numbers. The Sony BRAVIA 8 has some of the lowest input lag we've ever seen on a Sony TV. The two TVs are on par at 120 Hz, which is extremely impressive for Sony. However, the LG C4 has a clear edge at 60 Hz, and while the Sony caps out at 120 Hz, the LG supports up to 144 Hz, giving it a level of performance for PC gamers that the Sony TV can't match. Keep working at it, Sony! But for now, the LG C4 still has the slight edge. So, which one of these is the winner? Well, the Sony BRAVIA 8 is an excellent TV, and anyone would be happy to own it. But the LG C4 is clearly the better option for most people. Outside of its slight edge in upscaling, the Sony BRAVIA 8 loses out against the LG C4 in every category. It has fewer HDMI 2.1 ports, it's limited to 4K at 120 Hz, has higher input lag at 60 Hz, and it isn't as bright in HDR outside of its game mode. It's also less accurate than the C4. Then, there's the price. The LG C4 usually sells for less than the Sony BRAVIA 8. It used to be that we could recommend Sony TVs for their image processing alone, but LG has caught up. And it's now hard to recommend the Sony BRAVIA 8 to anyone but the most ardent Sony fans who value the small integration features that come with owning a PS5 or Sony sound system. The LG C4's true competition is the Samsung S90D OLED, which is noticeably brighter and more colorful than the C4, especially in game mode. The LG does have a slight edge in SDR and HDR accuracy, as well as in image processing outside of HDR native gradient handling, which is truly fantastic on the S90D. Unlike the Sony BRAVIA 8 and the LG C4, the Samsung S90D doesn't support Dolby Vision, instead sticking to Samsung's HDR 10+. So movie purists might still prefer the LG C4, but gamers should really strongly consider the Samsung. And hey, it's also sold for a cheaper price than the Sony BRAVIA 8. Well, that's all for our comparison between the LG C4 and the Sony BRAVIA 8. If you want to learn more, check out the full reviews on our website, or use our comparison tool to look at the TVs side by side. The links are in the description below. Until next time, I'm Abby from Rtings.com, where we help you find the best product for your needs. It also has Sony's S-Center input, so you can connect certain Sony branded soundbars and receivers to the TV and use the TV's built-in speakers as the center channel.
That is a tongue twister.